My name is Steve Whitehouse, and my firm was hired by Friends of Community Board 6, which is a not-for-profit group associated with your local community board here at the Gowanus. They went through a multi-year process of getting a grant from the State Department of State for a brownfield opportunity area study for the Gowanus. The program of the Department of State is for specifically geared towards economic development. It's towards the reuse strategies of these lands that are deemed brownfields, not Superfund sites, but specifically brownfields. And it speaks about creating strategic sites, and they have this three-stage process. The pre-nomination was done. We were hired to do the nomination study, and that included an inventory of local conditions and a series of planning and policy recommendations in these strategic sites. And it was, I'm a landscape architect and a planner, and there are a few design recommendations involved in the report, but they're not in this presentation. This was really wearing the planning hat, and it became a study of how to understand the industrial manufacturing sector of the Gowanus and find out what was really going on and what their issues were and what their prognosis for the future was. And when I went to the interview, I had a team there. Probably shouldn't tell this story, but I am anyway. And I said in the interview, I had done public outreach in the Gowanus area before, and I said there are lots of groups that are represented, but the group that's hardest to get to the table for any of these discussions are the business owners, the property owners, and the tenants. They're working all day. They may not know about this. They may go home at night. You don't get them. And Friends of Community Board 6 says, we have a solution for you. So in fact, our team was recobbled together, and we worked with the Southwest Industrial Brooklyn Development Corporation, SWBDC, and with the Pratt Center for Community Development, developed outreach surveys to the industrial community and using SWBDC's models. We also had Appleseed on our team doing economic analysis. And these are some of the things we did. I don't think I'll need to go through all of the list here, but there were stakeholder meetings, there was an advisory panel, there was an advisory executive panel of Friends of Community Board 6, came back to the property owners, talked to real estate brokers, and the question in the corner, what is going on in Gowanus today and how can we support it? Well, if you read the New York Times, you won't discover it. That's what I discovered this last weekend, or you'll hear one view of it. This is the area colored here was the area that was under consideration by city planning in 2009 for a rezoning study. Not all of it was going to be changed, but that was their rezoning study. And the areas C and E, the sort of purple ones, were going to retain some part of their industrial zoning. The C was talking about becoming a mixed-use zone. It's currently M1. And the E is M2 and was supposed to remain M2. That entire area-wide study was put on hold because the canal was declared a Superfund. The environmental review necessary for the zoning could not be completed, and so it was put on hold. But right now, despite what the New York Times says and about how soon it's all going to change, this is the existing zoning. The existing zoning in the Gowanus is what it was in 2009, and there are no current plans right now, no filed reports to change it. And we were deliberately, Community Board 6 deliberately chose us to look at areas C and E, and the sort of outline there, we expanded it a couple of sites because they wanted this to be about job retention and not specifically about the land use issues that dominate all the discussion in the Gowanus. You'll also notice that while it has frontage on the canal, is that most of the land is not waterfront land at all, which is a little bit different than most of the focus today. So the Brownfield Opportunity Area Study poster child, I think, is probably some 500-acre site in Utica, New York that has that factory that fell apart and nobody's done anything with it and they're trying to figure out what to do with it. What we found instead with Gowanus is it's very well used. By the standards of most industrial areas, it's very well occupied. It's a historic a center of industry. It's different from its surrounding neighborhoods and it's different from other industrial areas. It's very well located for distribution within New York, to lower Manhattan, downtown Brooklyn. The materials that built brownstone Brooklyn came in on the Gowanus Canal, and it still has a lot of those building trades there. The map up here is a population notes, so you can see it sits like a donut, and right to the right of that, the zoning, the industrial zoning is right, the hole in the center of the donut of brownstone Brooklyn. And that is also its issue, is because of the incredible real estate value represented by brownstone Brooklyn and the pressure it puts upon that whole. So we found that in our survey that most of those businesses planned to grow, most of them wanted to stay, and there had been a great deal of job growth. Some of that's illusory. There's job growth dot charts there. A large number of jobs had to do with a home healthcare organization that put their headquarters there, so the people working all over Brooklyn had that reported in their census as the home address. But even when we took that out, there was job growth. There was a lot of that job growth was in the retail sectors, and that was before Whole Foods opened, but it still represented big boxes. And there was a slight decline in manufacturing and industry over those 10 years. Couple complicated charts, I happen to like them. But say a little bit, this chart on the bottom speaks to the sectors within the Gowanus. Construction, wholesale trade, manufacturing, retail trade. But because of how Claritas organizes its information, Dykes Lumber, because they have a retail trade, shows up as retail. And so all those little gray boxes are firms across those sectors that are involved in some way in the building trades, which is the largest sector of businesses in the Gowanus, are people related to construction, building trades, marble shops, architectural grill, those sorts of things. The other point, which I'd like to make, the chart on the upper right, are two complicated charts. The first one has to do with time in the current location, and most people have been in their current location less than 5 years, 10 years, and there's a big gap in the middle, and then there are a couple of firms that have been there a long time. And if you look at the chart below, that has to do with people who own their firms, own their place of business, their real estate, and how long they've been there. So it's showing that the firms that have been there a long time are the ones that own their business. It's not surprising, it's just very, very skewed. Now, it's very attractive to business. It's largely occupied, and it's grossly underinvested. They're older, unimproved buildings. It's not built to, 80% of our surveys, the business is rented. Most of those short-term leases, over half of them under 5 years, a third of them 1 year or less. Those are fast, they may be startup businesses, a lot of them are startup businesses. They won't get a long-term lease, but they're also landlords who are not giving long-term leases to any of these businesses. And this question of real estate, the few graphs there, the one on the left, it has to do with percent of built of allowable FAR. The FAR is 2. Gowanus is not built out. It's not close to built out. There's lots of developable land right there, and it's not being developed for its zoned uses. Now, there are a lot of businesses there that have yard uses, and they're not necessarily going to build structures to do their business. And then the other map there is the study areas building year built, and the darker red buildings are buildings built before 1940. And most of the buildings haven't had a building permit pulled on them until before 1985, after 1985. There's very little level of investment in any of these structures. There are tenant investments that come in with a new tenant, but very little investment. And this question of real estate market uncertainty, we had a lot of discussions about this. Well, I'll pick that one up later. So again, the real estate market uncertainty, we heard this from the industrial businesses at all, is that people didn't know what was happening with the real estate market. And hey, I'm zone manufacturing, but this person's holding a space vacant. But the New York Times says soon it will all change. And so even though in some respects, and we had this conversation with our steering committee, and Aileen's here, and thank you, about the policies are clear. It's industrial business zone, it's M2 zoning. The one little article by the New York Times, and everyone's going to think that the zoning or the allowable uses are immediately unclear. The flood risk, Sandy happened during our study, happened halfway through our outreach questionnaires of the businesses, so we didn't go back and do it all. I can't say I have any great, and we didn't do all the resiliency work about how to make these buildings work, and it's extraordinarily challenging. There are lousy telecommunications, new businesses coming in that need that. They have cable that fails. They have telephone that fails. They don't have internet. This code word, perception of conflict with new as-of-right uses, is about the hotels that are allowed in the M1 zone. It was almost universally abhorred by the existing industrial uses. I've been here for 35 years, and now people calling up DEP for noise complaints on me. They're complaining that, oh, I'm starting my work at 7 o'clock like I have for the last 20 years because there are people sleeping in the hotel rooms upstairs. And the question of development pressure. So we had goals, or our stakeholders had goals. They wanted to continue to grow an industrial business presence in the Gowanus. Are they swimming uphill or upstream? We try to avoid all those metaphors, Gowanus metaphors, swimming upstream, you know, upwelling, groundswell. We try to, certain metaphors we try to avoid, but they did want to preserve a navigable canal for all users, and they were not primarily maritime users, the people who we reached in our study. And they were interested in the synergy of new uses and new energy within their neighborhood. So we're not going to go through all of this in detail. I'm going to pick out a couple ones. Transit alternative transportation. That came up because one of the things that the businesses said they had trouble with was parking for their customers, for their employees. And one of the things that happened in this neighborhood is they stopped local bus service on 3rd Avenue. So there's lots of efforts to try to get local bus service back to 3rd Avenue to support those businesses. We did do some work on street hierarchy, looking primarily at the east-west streets that cross the canal as places that need to be designed for pedestrians, bikes, and then primarily carving out 2nd Avenue as still an industrial corridor. The parking shortage, we do think there's a need for a parking study. We know there are lots of empty parking spaces at Pathmark and other places that are overbuilt. And we did talk about connecting potential investors with information and incentive programs. I'll show you something about that later. Something that is going forward, or that the Community Board, Friends of Community Board 6 is actively interested in, is the idea of creating this Gowanus business advocate, and as part of that, exploring, and they have some support from Brad Lander to support this, the formation of an industrial business improvement district, largely within the M2 zone, to try to give them some collective clout and organization and access to resources to help their preservation, if you will. Another shorthand here, explore the possibility of modifying local M zoning to further protect and encourage industrial uses, a little bit of a shorthand for hotels. We wanted to partner with EDC. We're still waiting to see how that might happen, and try to figure out how to get investment into this building stock, because it's not happening. Navigable canal, I think I'm going to skip most of this because simply to say that it reinforces a lot of the themes I think you've heard today, and I want to keep going on it. And we were interested in the on-street green infrastructure facilities, some of these emerging non-traditional industrial clusters. We found there's a food cluster. It's not surprising in all the interest about food, but lots of new food businesses growing up in the Gowanus. And there's a film and media business that's moving in a pretty substantial way in terms of new businesses that are coming into the traditional businesses that have been in the Gowanus, and to preserve the existing character through some of the architecture. I am going to loop backwards about this as a little note, speaks to the Esplanades. One of those businesses is Eastern Effects. They're a big media company. And this is a little side note to the whole question about Esplanades. They were seeking a lease for a building that fronted the Gowanus Canal. And because they occasionally rent their studios, they're classified as the zoning, primarily there's storage, they're technical things, but they're classified by the zoning as a commercial use because they have some studio rental space. So they basically learned, fortunately before they put down a lot of their money, that if they were signed this lease, that if they walked into the building department with to change anything, that they were going to be told they had to build the waterfront esplanade pursuant to city planning guidelines. And they walked away from that deal, because that's a $3 million project on top of everything else. easily a $3 million project to build out the Esplanade according to the city planning waterfront standards, and it wasn't the kind of business they had. It's not the kind of margins they could support. What kind of business would support those margins? Large retail operations and big apartment buildings. And I actually do think one of the things that we came around to the fact that I believe there's a disparity here between what the zoning says, how you have to build an Esplanade, and the uses that people in the neighborhood want to see continuing and growing along the canal. We had to identify strategic sites as part of this. These are 18 sites we identified. There were a cluster of them around the Fulton MGP site, which are eventually going to have to be dug out, and a couple others. We did talk to almost everyone here, and we came down to 3 sites. This is our matrix. And believe me, all of this information is available to you. I'll give you the BOA is now published. It is available on the Friends of Community Board 6 website as of about a week ago, I think. And they also have some copies there, at least they're starting to distribute copies of it. But this is part of our matrix. And then we identified 3 main sites, and even as we were identifying them, things are changing out from underneath them. The R.G. Dunn building is recently leased by, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting his first name. He's the Boymel Green, who's the son of the Boymel Green, who has built the apartments on 4th Avenue. And he may have a hotel concept in mind for that building. The Manifold Supply Building, which was discussed as a potential charter school, may actually be being redeveloped, or may be a possibility for a manufacturing industrial zoning use in there. And the Kentile Building, and it's not that we had any great insight as to a future redevelopment or reinvestment within that building. It just seemed so, both because of its size and its location in the center of the district, just seemed so central to the notions of the Gowanus as an industrial district. So I'm sorry, this is a slide I realized after I sent it in I should have completely updated this. The next steps are sort of done. We did finalize the recommendations. The Office of Environmental Remediation did hire Sobro to do more research onto those strategic sites. We completed this nomination study. The state has accepted it. And Friends of Community Board 6 has gotten a little bit of money from Brad Lander to advance this notion or the feasibility of this industrial business zone and this bid. And I want to show you something else. In terms of, this is just fun, or it's actually quite valuable. This is what we came to know as the squid. I kept on saying, I'm going to mention Melanie Weddick's name. She was the planner in charge of this, and she did a fantastic job. And I kept on saying to her, Melanie, what are all these programs? What's available out there? What information can we give to businesses to give them a hand to help them do anything? And we thought maybe would we be inventing a program, but no, then we found out there were all these things. Then we said, well, how do we get them to people? So let's see if this works. So this is actually available. The squid is on the website. I need to click this once. And of Community Board 6, it's also on the Starr Whitehouse website. So if you are a manufacturer and you're interested in capital improvements, and you say, what's this Empire State Manufacturing? It takes you to a page there. It describes the program. It has a live website that takes you right to the ESDC site. You say you're interested in something else. Anyway, you can end up scrolling through all of these things, these resources. Now they're not specifically available to the people just in the Gowanus Canal. They're available to anybody. But I have to say that the constituency we were working with was transfixed by this. I hope they're going and finding some resources. My quick take before I conclude all this stuff is that, and I think you've heard it here, the economic forces that's involved inherent in the disparity of the real estate value of residential land in this general area to industrial land are powerful. They're like the weather. And right now, I think we're looking at a sale price of a multiple somewhere between 4 and 8 between the price of industrial land and the price of residential land. And that's a pretty sweet windfall if you can have it. And yet there is, we believe, a viability for industrial manufacturing jobs here, for jobs that right now are overwhelmingly local in terms of who is doing them, who has those jobs. They don't require advanced degrees. They don't require everyone to be a symbolic analyst. And while everyone, you know, I love the idea of people making artisanal pickles too. I like it, but there are lots of other jobs as well that exist in the region, and which I believe contribute to a more diversified economy and more transportation efficient distribution of consumer goods and any number of things that we want to see as part of a complete city. This may be swimming against the tide, to use another unfortunate Gowanus reference, the same one again, and there's a good tide. Whatever current there is the tide, I believe, unless, God forbid, you're out there in the CSO. But so that is where we were with it. I found it fascinating. I find, in fact, there's some very hopeful and encouraging things in it. That we did find people as various. I thought it was very interesting what the American Can Factory was doing in terms of making a curated industrial space. That they were starting to get higher values for that space that would promote and support investment in their buildings and appear at this point to be committed to that type of a future. Whether that model can be replicated by anyone else or whether it's unique to the people running that place right now, I'm not sure. But that's a little rundown of what we did, and I think that's it. And that right now, I think, is I'll leave that up there for the next person. That is the Friends of a Community Board 6 website if you're interested in looking at any of these materials further. Thanks.